Hey everyone, my name is Poisonblade and I hope all of you are having an amazing day. So today I'm going to be renovating slash recycling an old factory that I'm going to build into a sort of modern style food court with some container buildings, because I wanted to finally for once use the field that I study in college, which is I think urban design and urban planning if you directly translate it, but I'm not sure, and use it in Planet Zoo. So for I think one of the first times, like very explicitly, I will use my field of study for college to actually build something in Planet Zoo. So with that being said, let's get into today's build. So because I'm going to use like container style buildings, or basically reusing like old like shipping containers to make it into like buildings and such, and extensions to existing buildings, I have to make those containers first, but I also need to make sure that they are, well, that I can sort of mold them, of course, into new buildings or extensions to buildings. So I had to make sure that like the minimum size was of course 4 meters, so that I could potentially build a shop into it, because it's going to be a food court. And at this point, the factory thing wasn't really a thing yet. I was just thinking renovating or recycling old shipping containers into new buildings. And the thought process behind this was, well, recycling, not throwing things away that could be reused. And container buildings are somewhat a thing, or especially when it comes to like urban planning or urban design. And I'm going to say this right now, this is how I learned things, and everyone who like studies or does anything with urban design of course has perhaps different opinions or different ways of dealing with things. So I'm just going to use what I've learned and how I think about things to build something. But I have seen like some container buildings and they look pretty nice. So I wanted to try and use that in Planet Zoo. Also, this is, I think, one of the times that I built like the smallest shops for me. Because usually when I make a shop, it's a little bit of an afterthought that there needs to be a shop in there. Or it's like at the forefront of the build. So most of the time, well, this is just a thing with me in general. I build buildings and then they just tend to get larger and larger. So the shops that I built today are tiny for me. But when it comes to container buildings, it really was just like, I want this industrial like feel. I want to have it like that, maybe like an old container depot was being renovated, or like they wanted to reuse the area without really losing that industrial feel or container feel. So I wanted to basically use what was already there to make it into something new. So maybe this container depot was abandoned, there were still some containers left, or maybe they brought in new containers, because that's of course also a thing. And then basically built a food court out of this. And this is something that I've somewhat learned. Well, basically I've been bombarded with this at my college. So basically just using the old identity of an area or site to create a new identity for it, or like a new image for it. So for like an old container depot, using that to make a new identity for it or image, so that you basically use the history of an area to make it attractive. I also had to think, this is a weird thing, but, well, not weird, but, well, in today's world, we also, or at least I know to have to think about this, is the, how am I going to say this? The Instagram worthiness of a place. So, yeah, with the coffee store, I immediately just thought Starbucks. And it's not really like when I, well, do things for college and such, it's not really like the forefront of like, all right, this needs to be Instagram worthy, but we do have to think of like, how will people look at a place? Although with urban design, we usually don't really go into like architecture or really like the specifics of a place. Usually when I try to sort of explain what I do, it's usually along the lines of, I make maps. That's basically it, how I usually say that. Like if you open up a map, I basically just plop down where buildings or where certain areas are going to be. But I mean, most people usually sort of know what I'm doing when it's like I draw a map and then like architects and all of the more the people that go into more specific areas go forward with that map. Yeah, it was really fun to finally for once use real life experience to build something in Plant Zoo. Again, this is really not what Plant Zoo is for because there are no animals in today's video, but it's just fun to really use like the things that I've learned in college to actually build something. Yeah, the Instagram worthiness of a place is a little bit of a thing, very small though. But the other thing that is well more of a thing, or at least how I've learned it. Again, I'm going to say this again because I just want to make sure that nobody gets the wrong idea. But this is just how I think of it. There's so many approaches to like urban design and urban planning. Like there are so many ideas about how to do this. I'm just doing what I think and how I've learned some things. Like if you ask any urban designer, or urban planner, I think those are the titles, but again, I'm like trying to directly translate it from Dutch. But everybody is going to take differently about this because everybody has a different style, and it's kind of like asking different artists, or I don't know, something with like a creative inset. Like everybody will think differently. But when it comes to like influencers, or I already said so Instagram awareness, but most of the time when it comes to like influencers, we think of larger scale influencers. We think of like CEOs of like big forward thinking companies, not really of like your standard Instagram model or something. So just for everybody to know, no, we're not talking with Instagram models or anything. So just to get that out of the way, we're usually trying to approach like, I don't know, like the highest thing that I can think of is literally like CEO of Apple or something. Like I think any urban designer would literally be in heaven if they got into contact with a person of that status. Mostly it's just like local businesses and such who have like a lot of say in that specific area or something. So again, no, I'm not talking with Instagram models or something, and I'm actually glad with that. But anyway, so back to the container buildings, because I made some container buildings that are really like you can see that they are containers or former containers. But here I wanted to make a modern style container home. Again, this is going a little bit too much into architecture and not that much into urban design. Urban design again is really about like the bigger picture, and architecture can go into more specifics, or at least that's how I've been taught it. Yeah, I just try to make a building that yes is made out of container, but it's not too obvious. And of course, because this is just something, well, when I learned it, I was bombarded with is like trying to be environmentally friendly, trying to make things last a long time, because climate change and everything, and like those things are already thought of. It's weird though, because everything when it comes to urban design takes a long time to actually get into works, basically. Like a urban designer can make a plan now and it will not be put into action in like 30 years because the process is really that long. Urban designers or urban planners are working, but it just takes a long time for those plans to really go into action. Here's again the fun of Planet Zoo and all our like building simulators. You can actually just do what you want to do right away, while in the real world it takes a long time. But anyway, it was really fun to actually just use what I've been taught and try to use it in a building simulator, because Planet Zoo, yeah, it is a zoo building thing, but it's still like building mostly. Again, really fun to just use what I've been taught and try and make something out of it. So here the entire idea was again to have this old container depot, which later turned into an industrial revolution style factory, because why not? Like, this is sometimes how my brain works. I go from one idea and then it sort of slowly morphs into another thing in its entirety. So yeah, the idea was just to have this, well, now industrial style or industrial revolution style factory and change it into a modern food court with some homes. And this is very Dutch or just maybe European, but mailboxes in the doors because, yeah, I don't. Well, we have, of course, standalone mailboxes, but from what I know, in the Netherlands, it's only if your like front doors that amount of space from the road. So yeah, most people have just a mailbox in the front door, which I mean, I think is somewhat better than just having a standalone mailbox, because if it rains, your mail is just directly dry in your home. You don't have to go to an outside mailbox. But that's just my opinion. But anyway, of course, because environment and such is an important factor in today's, well, at least how I've been taught it's an important factor to include into like urban design and urban planning. There is well, not a lot, but there is a bit of thought in like, you know, having, what is the name of it? I forgot the name of it. Solar panels in your buildings, or like set space aside to include those, because again, urban design usually is like making maps and an architect goes further with that, or like a landscape architect or some other person usually takes the plans further. But now here's the point where I first wanted to just make this sole industrial revolution style factory, and then it just evolved into, yeah, this entire factory complex. Well, not entire factory complex, because I'm going to build the factory and then I'm going to build some like, you know, industrial revolution style homes, which was surprisingly easy because they were somewhat mass manufactured. They all looked pretty much the same down the road, so that was a little bit easier than building the actual factory itself, because yeah, most of the buildings were like those factories, they look really great. That's also one of the reasons why I at least have been taught to never like destroy those buildings unless you have like a good reason for them, because they have like this history behind them. There's a lot of people who really like this style of building, like this industrial style buildings. So whenever like in my field of study I come across those buildings, it's never the thought of like, what can I build in its place? It's mostly how can I use this to benefit ours in the future, basically. We usually try to incorporate historical buildings, even like dilapidated and such. So for this factory, I basically built the entire shell and did some of like the internal framing, because there were like metal beams and such in the building itself. But then the rest was basically stripped, so any like indoor walls or indoor walls were stripped, and then you build something new inside. Again, I just have to say this to make sure that you guys understand. These are just my thoughts on the subject. If you find any urban designer or urban planner, they might say something completely different, because it's all up to like somewhat personal taste. We don't all follow the same rules or the same, well, usually the same rules, but not the same train of thoughts. And I also have to say, I am still in college, so don't take what I say right now as like the words of a, let's just say, qualified urban designer or something like that. It's just what I've been taught and what I'm still being taught. So again, I am not an official urban designer or urban planner. I just go to college for studying that field. Yeah, again, this is I think the third or fourth time that I say this, but it's really fun to use something out of, well, the field that I study or my daily life into making something in Planet Zoo. And it's just fun to not have to wait like 30 years to see your plans being set into motion. And that's if your plans get accepted. So yeah, that's just something for all of you guys to know that yeah, it takes a long time for any plans to really come into work or go to, be fulfilled or realized, because there's a lot of paper to finally get something like approved and then get it into the works and such. We're basically, in a way, if I have to make it like really short and, specific, well, not specific, but make it really direct, the urban designers or urban planners of today are basically building the world of 30 years in the future. Yeah, again, it's fun, and now I finally get to build some industrial revolution style homes. So in the first video of these standalone builds, I wanted to build steampunk Asian buildings. I did not do that, but there's the industrial feel of today's build, so it sort of came full circle. But these homes are actually pretty easy to make because, as I said before, they somewhat are mass manufactured because, well, not really mass manufactured, but they were usually just built really quickly, somewhat, well, also tried to be as cheap as possible. I think in like these are 2 houses, but then there would perhaps probably be like 3 or 4 families living in this. Probably 3 or something, like maybe a family on the ground floor and maybe 2 on the top floor, and then you also have the space in the attic and such, so there would probably be 3 families living in a house that I think nowadays we would see as like a most one family home. Again, it's really fun to like combine what I know from real life, from college, into a build, but also combine my favorite subject into the mix with history, because yeah, history is the one class that I somewhat paid attention at in high school, because yeah, don't come to me for any kind of like maths or something, especially like physics or any kind of science related things. I always tell this story just to somewhat show how much of a dumbass I sometimes can be. But I think it was physics, or I think physics, where we basically were taught about like electricity and such. But when you how can I explain this? But we had this, I think, glass ball which had like the electricity that you could see inside of it, and if you touch that ball, your hair would go up and such. Yeah, I was a bit of a dumbass and thought it would be funny to, instead of putting my hand on it, touch it with my nose. I flew back. I wasn't like fully electrocuted, but the shock was just like bam in my face that I just flew into the whiteboard. Everybody laughed, and I can still laugh about it because it just shows that, yeah, even back in high school, I was a dumbass sometimes. But it's really hilarious to tell because, yeah, it's just the first signs of me being a squirrel. Also, the blue, red, and white building that I am going to delete, but it's going to come back in a smaller version. But that was literally just a fry shop, or like French fries, because when you build these shops, or when you like, well, for like urban design or urban planning, you set the space aside for these shops. I usually approach it and like try to have the shop owners and such personalize these shops to their fullest extent. So I usually, or I think most people that were in like the same college as I, in the same year, I think it might have the same approach. Probably not, because again, every urban designer is different and makes things based on like personal style and such. But it's usually a good thing to have the shop owner or the owner of the building be able to personalize their building, just because then for that owner you increase the value of the building because they did something to it, and you give the building its like own individual look, so that you don't get the industrial revolution style homes where everything basically looked the same. And that individualization usually works well to, you know, make a neighborhood or area really its own. But that's it for today's video. I am really again happy to show or use my personal experience in a build, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and if you want to see more, of course subscribing and liking is a great way to kind of keep up with the channel, and I hope all of you have a lovely day. The next video or build will actually go into a continent that I not really have explored yet on the channel. And I am building that build on the live streams, and for everybody there, I usually live stream on Tuesday and Friday on the Purple platform. Or Twitch. I think I can say that in the video. YouTube doesn't like it when you like link to another site. But anyway, again, that's going to be it, so hope you enjoyed it, and I hope all of you have a lovely day. Bye bye!